Wolfclock Productions, Wolfclock here. I was going to start off this video by saying that Portal 1 is one of the most influential games ever made, but I've literally used those exact words to start a video in the past, so we're going to skip it this time. While Portal initially had a much larger scope, the game that we wound up with was initially made to be the tutorial of the game, teaching and reinforcing new mechanics in every test chamber until the final confrontation with Glados. Generally, when introducing a new mechanic to a player, it is important to use the rule of 3, that is, tutorializing the mechanic 3 times in order to ensure that the player has a grasp of the mechanic. Most of Portal 1 follows this. However, if you ask a sizable portion of players about the game's mechanics, there will be a noteworthy outlier in the tutorialization near the end of the game. Welcome back to Betafied, the show where we take a look at the unused and cut content of a game and try to figure out what it was, how it worked, and why it was removed from the final version. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the rocket turret's tutorialization in Portal 1, explore how rocket redirection was explained during the game's development, figure out why this level doesn't work in the final game, and finally, explore some of the ways that rocket turrets could have been better explained and utilized in the final game. One last announcement before we dive into things here. By viewer recommendation, I've added a few ways to support me directly if you're interested in seeing more of what I do, namely the Super Thanks option here on YouTube and a Ko-fi link in the description. Eventually, I'll likely be setting up a Patreon YouTube membership, but for right now, if you'd like to show extra support, those are the best ways to do it. I'm currently trying to help out a friend who's facing homelessness and unemployment, and YouTube didn't process my December ad revenue until a few days ago, meaning I'm still yet to be paid, so every little thing counts. And of course, if you can't support monetarily but would still like to help out, the best way of doing that is with a like, comment, sharing my videos around, and subscribing. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get back to the video. Portal 1 is divided into 2 sections, the test chambers and the escape. However, something that you may have not known is that many of the later test chambers in the final game were initially escape sequence chambers as well. The turret chamber, for instance, Test Chamber 16, started its life as a behind-the-scenes level, where you'd navigate around a turret-infested office before it was reworked into a test chamber in the final game. The point that I'm making here is that, while the art style of the levels changed partway through Portal's campaign, the actual function of each level being a tutorial that introduces and reinforces puzzle mechanics remains the same, and the escape sequence in the final game is no exception to this. When the player reaches the level Escape 01, they're introduced to a new puzzle mechanic, the rocket turret. Last episode also covered a different quirk of these NPCs, but to recap for those who haven't played Portal, rocket turrets are slow-turning, rocket-launching cores that are constantly rotating towards the player while within line of sight. However, something that I learned from my last video on rocket turrets is that many players, including some friends I know in real life, were unaware of the intended solution to the introductory rocket turret puzzle. When the player first enters the rocket turret's room, they are presented with a dead end and a button used to turn said turret on. Upon activation, the rocket turret turns to face the player, activates, and fires a rocket at the glass pane in front of them. This teaches the basic function of the rocket turret, and the object that players should be looking out for that the rocket turret interacts with. The second part of this room is simply a second glass pane on the other side of the rocket turret's chamber. This second pane, being the only obvious way through, reinforces the function of the rocket turret a second time. The player needs to stand between the rocket turret and glass pane, wait for it to activate, and move out of the way so that it can fire a rocket and destroy the glass. So far so good. The player has been safely introduced to a new mechanic and has been given a locked box puzzle where the solution is obvious. However, when we reach the next room, there are some inherent design problems. After passing the room with the rocket turret, the player exits the room, walks down a short hallway, and then enters a different room with a glass pane on the right. Players that have been paying attention at this point will remember that they have a portal gun, will see the portable surface lying opposite to the glass, and will realize what the intended solution here is. This is the first time that the rocket turret needs to interact with portals. The player is expected to return to the rocket turret's chamber, fire a portal on the wall, then fire a second portal in the room down the hallway, so that a rocket flies through the portal and breaks the glass. There are a lot of problems with this design, so let's go through them one at a time. 1. The intended solution here requires backtracking towards an invulnerable hazard. Up to this point, the player has been trained to avoid the line of sight of turrets, keep out of hazardous water, and stay out of the path of energy pellets. With this puzzle, however, the player is expected to run down the line of sight of a rocket turret in order to place a portal on the wall next to it. This goes against what the player was taught, as well as the intuitive sense of, oh, that's dangerous but stationary. I should stay out of its line of sight. Furthermore, backtracking up to this point has not been a necessary requirement for previous puzzles unless it was intuitive and obvious, such as going down a hallway with a cube and returning down the same hallway to place said cube on a button. 2. The intended solution to the puzzle is outside the line of sight of the player. Look, I have ADHD. I forget things moments after they happen. I forget what I'm saying as I'm speaking. A player forgetting what they just did is a very frequent occurrence, and the fact that the rocket turret is panic-inducing adds to this risk. When a new mechanic is introduced and isn't clearly labeled as a testing element, but instead as a hazard to avoid, players won't always consider how it interacts with the environment, and will instead think about how it interacts with them. As a result of these issues, some players will simply just not pick up on the fact that the rocket turret is a testing element in the first place, since it's out of sight and nowhere near the thing that they need to make it interact with. 3. The turret's mechanic has not met the rule of 3. As I mentioned earlier, it's generally necessary to explain a mechanic 3 times in 3 ways before it's cemented into players' minds. This doesn't necessarily mean doing the same thing 3 times, and throughout the game, Glados telling the player what to do and how things work also serve this purpose, as do on-screen button prompts. Think back to going through portals. The player goes through portals placed for them 3 times in 3 tests before receiving the portal gun at the end of Test Chamber 2. Cube and button tests. Test Chamber 0 introduces a sample. Test Chamber 1 has it interacting with portals, and Test Chamber 4 has the player place their own portal and retrieve the cube and place it on the button. However, comparing this with the rocket turret here, we've only seen it shoot glass twice so far. The synapse connection between a rocket turret and breaking glass has not yet been formed, and as a result, the player is yet to intuit that glass windows are broken by rocket turrets. 4. The object that the turret fires at is too generic. Glass windows have been used throughout the entire game. They are literally the first thing that the player sees. At this point, most players on their first playthrough are 2 hours in, if not longer, and this is the first time glass breaking has been a mechanic. Let's consider other game mechanics up to this point. We have doors, cubes, floor buttons, switch buttons, and energy pellet launchers and catchers. One thing that they all have in common with each other is that they're visually distinct, usually glossy white with blue lights. These windows, however, are the exact same as every other window we've seen up to this point. As early as Test Chamber 1, you can throw objects and yourself at these windows and they will not break. Because of this, players simply don't consider glass as test elements, and aren't able to intuitively associate them with rocket turrets in the way that floor buttons are associated with boxes, and pellet catchers are associated with pellets. Finally, 5. This puzzle is not a one-solution locked box puzzle. The easiest way to get a player to learn something when you don't have enough time to teach it to them properly is to lock said player in a box with only one solution. As mentioned in the developer commentary, most puzzles in the game are supposed to only have one solution unless other solutions are arguably more difficult or intelligent to pull off than the intended one. Unfortunately, this puzzle has one major flaw that some players take as the intended solution. Observe. As you can see, this puzzle can be brute forced just by slamming props against the glass until it breaks. Now I try not to claim some major wisdom, but I would argue that this is not a more intelligent solution than the intended one. Now some of you may be thinking to yourselves, wow, who wouldn't be able to understand this puzzle? It's so simple. You shoot a portal and the rocket turret fires a rocket into the glass. Who could be so dumb that they don't know? Fair enough. However, I have it on reasonable authority here that some of the same viewers thinking that right now are about to be dumbfounded by what I'm about to show, for you see, that was only the first half of this level. Observe. When I released my previous video on the rocket turret, I had no idea that many people didn't know about this. and was stunned to see all the comments saying how awestruck they were at seeing my solution. As dumbfounded as I was at the time reading those comments, I soon came to realize that this was actually a pretty reasonable response that many users were having. Being able to intuit that glass windows are breakable with rocket turrets after doing so twice is one thing, but there's absolutely no build-up for being able to break glass pipes. Up to this point in the game, glass pipes have only ever been used as decoration and for transporting cubes, with the one exception being the start of the escape sequence, where the player enters a damaged one that leads them back into the testing track. Needless to say, there's genuinely zero reason for players to assume not only that the pipes would be breakable here, and here alone throughout the entire game, but that the correct solution would be to destroy the one thing that has up to this point always been used as decoration, and then use the cube that it spawns to climb through the vent. From what I've learned, many players opt to instead do the following. Now, there is an equal argument to be made here that these props are also decorations that have never been used as testing elements up to this point either. And to that I say, yeah, fair enough. However, in a physics-based puzzle game, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that you can use any physics object to your advantage in order to solve a puzzle, and as a matter of fact, Portal's old in-dev art style was changed in order to combat this very mindset, but that's a topic for a different video on a different day. But how did this happen? Well, to answer this, we have to go back to the past. Samurai Jack. This is a photo of the earliest known version of this puzzle, circa early to mid 2006, and likely during an era that we in the Portal research community refer to as the trailer era. You see, before the rocket turret fired rockets, it instead fired lasers, and instead of changing the speed at which it locked onto the player, it turned at a fixed rate that was determined by the game's difficulty setting. However, despite these more superficial differences, the laser turret functioned pretty much the same as the rocket turret, and because I don't want to recreate the entity from scratch, I'm just going to substitute it with the rocket turret here, since it will more or less function the same way. Now, during the Game Developer Conference talk held by Nuclear Monkey Software in 2008, project lead Kim Swift explains that the basic function of this puzzle was that you'd have to redirect the lasers at these unique orange plugs in order to blow them up and progress through the level.
I know, aren't they pretty? Isn't that nice? These are training maps that we had for the James Bond style lasers, where essentially you'd have to place your portal in front of the laser and then, place one on a wall and then redirect the laser at that weird orange thing sitting in that glass wall, and, break through and be able to get to the other side, where you would meet Glados. That's Glados there in her giant shimmery cube phase. Don't you love temp art? It's great stuff. And once again, you'd have to redirect those lasers at those, which you find out are orange plugs supplying Glados with power. And, the end. But, yeah, it was not good. The lasers were extremely boring to dodge, and kind of difficult to tune, because we would make them follow the player kind of fast, and then it would be unfair, and if we, slowed them down, then they're boring. They were also really difficult to aim, believe it or not, through a portal. It was kind of a pain. And it was also hard to tell if you were hit by the lasers, too. So, we abandoned this idea and instead chose to use a rocket launcher.
I said a very important word in that last sentence. Did you catch it? Yeah. Unique. Originally, laser turrets, which, again, became the rocket turrets that we know and love today, actually did have a unique object that you were meant to target, as opposed to simple glass windows. This already solves one of our major design issues present in the final game. Here's another one. The chamber doesn't include any useless garbage that can accidentally be mistaken as testing elements. It's simple and clean. While this version of the tutorial is far from perfect, it conveys what the laser turret is used for much better than rocket turrets in the final game, in my personal humble opinion. Here, I've rebuilt the test so that we can try it out ourselves. As we can see here, the basic concept of redirect the turret to shoot a thing is the same. However, the thing in question is unique. Instead of shooting glass windows, we're shooting orange plugs that provide the player with obvious feedback. The second screenshot of the section even shows that the plugs falling off was accompanied by sparks and smoke, meaning that it gave a very obvious and unique response that helped distinguish it as an element. So that's what the first version of this test looked and acted like. But we're not done yet. You see, for Portal 1, we not only have the asset sources from the final release of the game, we also have the map sources from December of 2006. And with these sources, we can see how this test worked months before the final version of the game. Let's jump right into December 2006's version of Escape 01 and see how the rocket turret introduction works. Afterwards, I'll break down the differences between this level and the final, and give my thoughts on what it does better and what it does worse.
You don't even care, do you? Someday we'll remember this and laugh, and laugh, and laugh. Oh boy. Well, you may as well come on back. Someday we'll remember this and laugh, and laugh, and laugh. Oh boy. Well, you may as well come on back.
So the first thing that I wanted to note here is the shape of the room. Since the room exits to the right into a hallway that's parallel to the second window that the player has to break instead of forward into a perpendicular hallway, it's quicker and easier for the player to find cover from the rocket turret's view. This makes walking back towards it to shoot a portal much less dangerous. Secondly, the fact that there is one less room to navigate before reaching the third window means that the player still has the rocket turret fresh in their mind. Additionally, the fact that the room remains in the same style, as opposed to switching from a chamber style, to an observation room style, to an office style, to a behind-the-scenes style in quick succession, helps suggest to the player that they're still doing the same puzzle. The third thing to note is the lack of clutter. Unlike the final version of the test, which has several props that can be used to skip it, this version is a proper locked box puzzle, with only one solution. That is, unless you take a dead turret from the start of the level and prop climb with it. Finally, we have the tube itself. The rate at which the cube travels by is much more frequent than the one in the final game, catching the eye of the player more easily. The lack of additional detailing in the surrounding area makes it stand out better than the tube in the final game, and the lighting illuminates it more. Now, I want to clarify that these things do not make this version of the puzzle perfect. In fact, there's at least one thing that I can point out that works better from a design standpoint in the final game. The vent. The use of a piston suddenly appearing through the wall in an audio cue from Glados does not effectively convey that the player needs to climb on top of said piston in order to reach the next area. The trap at the start of the level where the players drop down into a room with turrets paired with a voice line in the December 2006 version, conveys to the player that spoken GLaDOS lines and moving pistons are a hazard to be avoided, as opposed to an obstacle to be traversed. I don't think it's too big of an issue, of course, because there's still literally only one way to progress in this version of the map, but I thought it would be worth pointing out. Additionally, even though the tube itself is well lit, there are no lights pointing at it, nor are there any on the walls that can be used to redirect a rocket into it. This is actually something that I think is done better in the final version of the map. This is all just how I feel about the design, but I'd like to hear what you all think about my analysis as well. Between the laser turret introduction, the version of Escape 01 from 2006, and the version that we see in the final game, which do you all prefer and why? Feel free to let me know in the comments. Now, you may be wondering why rocket turrets are tutorialized as rapidly as they are, and I actually do have an answer for you. But to answer that, we have to take a look at one more version of the level, one that had to be manually pieced back together from the map source files. In fact, this version was also described in the GDC talk from 2008. Folks, welcome to That section title isn't a joke. In the 2006 Escape 01 map source, there is an unused viz group called Steaming Refuse. When we turn it on, we find this odd section off in the void with multiple rocket turrets. The reason why this is over here is because originally the game ended on Escape 01, and if we grab and paste Escape 02 into the map, it lines up perfectly with the old GLaDOS room. In addition to this, the map logic reveals that GLaDOS initially needed to be shot with a rocket turret 4 times, as opposed to the 3 times in the default version of the map and in the final game. When we put it all back together, we're given a GLaDOS boss fight that heavily relies on the player's ability to redirect rockets, much more than in the final game. This version of the final boss was referred to by the developers as the Pillbox GLaDOS fight, and was likely in use in late 2006. In it, the player is tasked with chasing GLaDOS' brain down while avoiding obstacles that she places in front of them and redirecting rockets into her until she dies. Here's how the fight looks when it's restored.
To you. That thing you're attacking isn't important to me. It's the fluid catalytic cracking unit. It makes shoes for orphans. Go ahead and break it, hero. I don't care. Oh, I'm gonna kill you. 18.25-ounce packaged chocolate cake mix, 1 can prepared coconut pecan frosting, 3/4 cup vegetable oil, 4 large eggs, 1 cup semi-sweet chocolate chips, 3/4 cup butter or margarine softened, 1 2/3 cups granulated sugar, 3 large eggs, 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, 2 cups all-purpose flour, 2/3 cup cocoa, 1 1/4 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon salt, 1/4 teaspoon baking powder, 1 1/3 cups water, 1 2 16 ounces each, cans, vanilla frosting. Don't forget garnishes such as fish-shaped crackers, fish-shaped candies, fish-shaped solid waste, fish-shaped dirt, fish-shaped ethyl benzene, pull and peel licorice, fish-shaped volatile, organic compounds, and sediment-shaped sediment. A 20-foot thick impermeable clay layer. Candy-coated peanut butter pieces, shaped like fish, blue and yellow food colors, alpha resins, unsaturated polyester resin, fiberglass surface resins, and volatile malted milk impoundments, 9 large egg yolks, 12 medium geosynthetic membranes, 3 large whole eggs, 1 cup granulated sugar, 1 cup lemon juice, 4 immunosensos, 2 cups heavy cream, 3 tablespoons granulated sugar, 2 egg-based gel flame fuels, 2 cups rhubarb, sliced, 2/3 cup granulated rhubarb, 1 tablespoon all-purpose rhubarb, 1 teaspoon grated. There really was a cake.
Additionally, Let's take a look at the version of the fight that is included in the December 2006 map sources. For time reasons, I'll only include the section that's different.
Teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon salt, 1/4 teaspoon baking powder, 1 and 1/3 cups of water, 1 to 2, 16 ounces each, cans, vanilla frosting. Don't forget garnishes such as fish-shaped crackers, fish-shaped candies, fish-shaped solid waste, fish-shaped dirt, fish-shaped ethyl benzene, roll and peel glycerin, permeable clay layer, candy-coated peanut butter pieces, shaped like fish, and yellow food colors, alpha resins, unsaturated polyester resins, fibers, 12 medium geosynthetic membranes, 3 large whole eggs, 1 cup granulated sugar, 1 cup lemon juice, 4 immunosensors, 2 sweet potato tea cake, take me to a picnic cake, dreamtime chocolate cake roll, tropical snack cake, vanilla fudge cake, sour cream pumpkin bun cake, spicy jalapeno chocolate cake, upside down apple coffee cake, upside down rhubarb cake, upside down benthic flux sampling device cake, vanilla crazy cake, vanilla crazy cake. Okay, we're even now. You can stop.
So, as you all can see, rocket turret redirection was much more involved and frequent in the Glados boss fight before being toned down for the final game, meaning that it was very important that the mechanic of redirecting rockets was fully understood by the player in time for the final encounter with Glados. Now, of course, rocket turrets are also utilized in the final game in Glados' boss fight, but the usage of them is much simpler during said boss fight, only having to stand in front of one and shoot a stack of portals to hit Glados. With how much more intricate they were in earlier versions of the game, it becomes obvious as to why the player needed a mastery of rocket redirection. So now that we know why it was important in earlier versions of Portal for the rocket turret tutorial to be well understood, and why the design fails in the final game, what can we do to fix it? Let's try and address some of the issues that the rocket turret introduction has that I pointed out in section 1, and see if we can use more modern design standards to make the otherwise misunderstood puzzle better reflect what it's trying to do. As you can see, I've redesigned the level to fix most of the issues initially present with the original versions. The default glass has been given a unique rim and new color to show that's different from the regular windows. This not only informs the player that these windows are different to the ones that we've seen throughout the game, but also helps associate the rocket turret and windows as a pair, and much like cubes and buttons, or pellets and catchers, players will instinctively seek out ways of destroying glass as blue with glowing rims from now on. Each time a window is destroyed, a new unique bell noise is now played. This helps give players a sense of accomplishment with their actions, therefore telling them that they're progressing correctly. In order to prevent players from using unintended objects, I've added a second fizzler just before the behind-the-scenes styled room. This compromise allows me to keep the extra details in the previous room while ensuring that they don't affect the puzzle itself. The room with the first redirect now has a unique rocket turret that activates behind a broken pipe to help suggest to players that rocket turrets can break glass pipes as well as glass windows. To help show the player where they should aim, I've added burn marks in the walls that the player is supposed to shoot. This is a common alignment practice and is actually used in the game by default for pellet catchers. Finally, I've added a unique design to the pipe that the player is meant to shoot that resembles the unique breakable glass. This should help ensure that players know that the intended solution here is to break the pipe with a rocket, and like the windows, it tells the player that it's a special kind of pipe and not just one of the regular decorative pipes seen elsewhere in the game. In my humble, personal opinion, I think these changes fix just about everything that was wrong with this puzzle. However, I'd love to hear what you all think. Were these changes sufficient, or were they overkill? What kinds of changes would you have done? Let me know in the comments. That about wraps things up. Thank you all very much for watching. If you'd like to try out my custom version of the level, I've included a download to my redesign of Escape 01 in the description. While Portal 1 is my favorite game second to none, there's no question in my mind that some tests were designed better than others. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, feel free to subscribe, and check the Betafied Mega playlist to see other videos like this one. If you'd like to support my work, a like and comment are always appreciated. And like I mentioned at the start of the video, if you want to go above and beyond, feel free to send me a tip. As always, I have been Wolfclock. I will see you all in the next video, whenever it may be, and thank you for watching.